Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I thought I'd do a video today about a simple beginner concept of value. Although it's a simple idea, value itself is one of the hardest things to master in both drawing and painting. And I thought that today I'd make an introduction as to what value is, why is it important, and then I'm going to paint a small demo using just a single color, demonstrating how powerful value can be in telling the story and creating the idea of space. So what is value? Essentially, value is the darkness and lightness of a color that we put on the page. So for example, if we're drawing, we might be thinking about our lights and the darks. So the lightest light is the white of the, or is the let's say is the lightness of the page, and we can assign it a value of 0. The darkest dark can go somewhere here, and that's going to be the darkest value that we're going to see in our drawing or in our painting. So it might be a shadow, or it might be a silhouette against some very bright light source. So that's our darkest value, the lightest and the darkest. Now there are millions of other values in between, and our eye is accustomed to seeing all those values, and in fact that's what makes our perception of the world three-dimensional. But when we're drawing and when we're painting, we have to be systematic about how we use this value. So what I like to do is actually just introduce only 2 intermediate values. So something that I use for my background, so some sort of very light value, I give it a measurement of 1, and then something that I use for my middle ground, and that sits somewhere between these 2. There we are. So in principle, using just these 4 values, it's possible to paint or draw the world around us. And the reason, again, I use 4 is because I have my highlights, I have my background, so objects in a distance, they generally appear less bright to us, or that for their lightness is 1. Then I have my objects in middle ground, and then I have my objects in foreground, which have this darkest value. So to me, the scale makes sense. In watercolor, we can do a similar exercise. So I'm going to take, we generally use the white of the page for our lights. So that's our value 0. Then I can make a light dilution. This is ivory black, so I'm just mixing up a little bit of ivory black in my well here. And what I'll actually do, I'll make this my darkest value. Yeah. So this can be my lightest, and then this here can be my darkest. Then I can take a little bit of this color mixture, put it here, add some water, dilute it a little bit. And this is how we control value in watercolor, is just by simply adding more water or more pigment depending on what we need. Now I can take a little bit of this mixture, put it here, add some more water to dilute it out. And that's it. And these are my 3 color values, with a white of the page being my lightest lightest light, or value 0. So very similar to this, I can start thinking about my highlights being the white of the page, my value 1 being this sort of light gray, my value 2 being somewhere in between my lightest gray and my darkest black. So how do we use this in practice? So I thought we'd do a little painting demo from imagination, but we will only going to use we'll only use a single color for it. So I thought we can use ivory black, but actually we don't. It doesn't really matter which color we use. The beautiful thing about value is that I can use my greens, I can use a blue, I can use an orange, and the painting will still look believable. In fact, it will look more artistic if I use an unusual color to convey an everyday object. So value itself is probably the most important thing that makes our paintings and drawings believable. It gives them an atmosphere, it creates a focal point in our drawings, and it gives all of our work a sense of depth and a sense of place. So it's a really lovely tool to be able to control and to master. It is also one of the most difficult things to control and to master. So for today, I thought, since we're doing a value painting, I thought I'd do a small value study, which we could then translate. We can think about individual values, where they're going to be placed within our picture, within our drawing, and then we're going to make a painting based on this value study. So I thought it would be a landscape. In fact, I'm quite keen for it to be a seascape, so I would like to have some sort of maybe some sort of boat or collection of boats here, and then maybe a cityscape or a townscape or a coastline or something going on the side, something like this. And then I want to introduce a light source. So I think I'm going to have my sun somewhere there, and then there's going to be a sense of light shining and reflecting on the water. So let's add a little bit of value to this. So first of all, these boats are going to be set against the brightest light source, which is the sun. So they're going to have the greatest value. So these are going to be my value 3 on my chart, like this. Something like that. Then I'm going to use my midtones, so maybe a combination of 1 and 2. So maybe start out with a light value here. But then add a little bit of interest, so maybe darken things up. Maybe there are layers of buildings or something similar like that are going to appear on the horizon there. And now the sea. So the sea is interesting. So we need to think about another type of perspective in this case, and it's called a planar perspective. So planar perspective gives a sense of depth using color. Generally speaking, objects that are far away, they have lighter tones, or lighter values. As objects move closer to us, their value increases. So this is what I'm going to do here as well. So I'm going to put a very light tone on on the sea first. I'm going to keep this white as my reflection. And then as I move closer to the shore, or closer to the observer, I should say, I'm going to start increasing the value of the water that we're seeing. To the point where things that are close to us, they're going to be nearly at 3. So let's try and annotate this. So we have our 0 is going to be here. This is going to be 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, and then 3, 3. So you can see how 1, 2, 3, how we have these layers of value, and they create a sense of depth in our sketch. Now, let's start also thinking about the clouds. So again, I'll start with a uniform 1 across the whole sky, just thinking about the placement of these clouds, how I would like them to appear with respect to the horizon. Now usually it creates much more interest if we add some darker values closer to our lightest value. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm just adding sort of a 2 against my 0. So there's a 2, there's a 0, there's a 1 here, and maybe some darker clouds up there. Something like that. And then of course we need to ensure that our horizon line is prominent, so that will also have a high value. So this is it. This is our little sketch, our value study. We've annotated our light source, we've got some background things, and we now have a general idea of what we're going to do with our values as we put them, where they're going to go on our page. And that means we can start our painting process. So I'm just going to keep this, I think I'll keep it handy just so I can refer to it. I'm not going to do an underpainting. I'm just going to go straight in with my brush and hope for the best. So first thing first, my light sun source, or my sun, is going to be here somewhere. So I'm going to start by kind of painting with a wet brush around it, because I want to do a little bit of sort of lost and found edges, but I also want to keep some space for the whiteness of the sky first. So I'm mixing an ivory black, a dark value of our ivory black, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of water to it to create my midtones. So the horizon line is going to be somewhere here. Dropping in some, so following my value study, I'm dropping in a little bit more pigment around my light source, making it look more striking against the light source. Adding some interest to the horizon. And even more pigment here to create my light. So you can already see how many values. I've got all of my values in here. I've got my 0, I've got my 1, I've got my 2, and I've got my 3. And with just these, I've created a really interesting setting, I think, a little bit enough depth for it to be a believable sky. Just going to make sure that the horizon has a straight line across it. So now I'm going to move on, and I'm going to paint the sea, or the water. So there are a couple of interesting areas here. So first of all, I want this to sparkle. So this is where dry brushing is, I think, is going to come in quite handy. So with a pretty dry-ish brush, I'm picking up all what I've got left of my pigment. I'm holding my brush like this, so I'm just going to do it side by side, almost flat against the page. And very important is the type of paper we're using for this technique. So this is a rough paper, which means that there's really rough grain on the paper. So the brush is going to naturally skip across this page, creating some nice illusions of sparkles. So I'm just adding these dry brush effects. Okay, next I'm just going to wet the rest of the white space and start adding a little bit of pigment. Now remember, we are working from furthest distance to the closest distance, which means that things that are further in the distance are going to be lighter, and as we move closer to our line of sight, or to our observer, we're going to darken things up. So I'm just adding this pigment carefully, considering where, and I'm adding it in layers. So starting from furthest layer or furthest distance, working my way in. I'm trying to do it evenly on both sides. I'm going to take a little bit more of my ivory black. I'm getting it even darker. There. And then very dark. Main thing is watercolor will dry lighter, so don't be afraid to use that pigment to create a stark contrast. Here we are. Okay, so we're already seeing what looks like a three-dimensional painting. So let's compare our values in our sketch. So we've got the 0 at the in the sun reflections. And then we've got our 1s, we've got our 2s, and then we've got our 3s. And they generally match the rest of the composition as well. Just checking. So we're getting to be fairly dry, which means I can start working on those distant things. So whether they are buildings or some sort of landscape features, it doesn't necessarily matter. I might need to wait a little longer. I'll wait a bit longer for it to dry. Okay, so I think this has dried sufficiently now, and we can think about adding a little bit of some of these background forms. So what I'm doing now is I'm just adding a little bit of variety. So I'm just dropping in raw pigment into certain just random areas of these cliffs or whatever, or buildings, whatever they might be. The main reason is just so that it doesn't look boring. If it doesn't have this variety, it tends to look a little bit flat, not as interesting to the observer. The other thing, what I thought I would do is just be a little bit, take advantage of the fact that we are working with watercolor, and very gently add a little bit of fuzziness to some of these structures here, for example. So again, they are in the distance, so we can play with their value. There we go. Now I think this is relatively dry. What I thought I'd do is just add some more interest to the sky. I don't really like how it appears now, so I thought I'd just add some more of cloud into this mixture. Just some more variety. Could work, maybe or maybe not. So maybe it's some sort of rain cloud that's looming over our town and our boats. Maybe it's the smog. What it also does is that it accentuates this contrast between light and dark, and that makes, I think that creates some interest and atmosphere in our painting. I'm just counterbalancing this side. This side has too much black, so I'm just adding a little bit more, a little darker values on the opposing side to bring some sort of balance to it. You will also see that I've kind of naturally or randomly have created these areas of white, and I kind of like them. I want to keep them, I think, and preserve them because, yeah, they do look kind of cool. Okay, now I think it's time for our boats. So the boats, if we remember our little value study, the boats, they are very dark, purposefully so. So we will use the highest value available to us to create a focal point of this painting. Again, I'll add these boats somewhere here. It doesn't look like boats at the minute, but they will in a second. Here comes the thing that makes them look like boats immediately. There we are, a little mast. Some more masts somewhere in the distance. Like so. Now we're just going to start painting a little bit darker and focus on our middle and foreground. So this is getting relatively dry. So I can start adding, doing some wet into my painting here. See how beautiful this dry brush technique works with water reflections. It just creates a lovely, lovely effect. Here we are. I'm just going to let it dry for now. Okay, so I think that's relatively dry. So we're going to carry on adding more value as we progress through this painting, and I anticipate that this is going to be the last time, or the last thing we need to do, the last layer. That's why I've sort of switched to my rigger brush. In this way I can add these last final details. So what I wanted to do is just first just to clarify the horizon a little bit. And now I'm just adding a little bit of texture to the waves. So this isn't really a still piece. This is water. It's meant to be moving. So I'm adding these elements of motion. I love using my rigger brush for it because it has a very random outcome. So whenever I add a line to it, just the nature of the bristles means that the line is quite jagged and quite random, which I like. Creates this feeling of looseness in my paintings. I think ideally, I don't like that there is this, that the slide just stops randomly here. Let's see if I can maybe scratch out some of this paint. It's making it worse. That's okay. But yeah, I just didn't like how it ends so abruptly. It should really, there's nothing here stop blocking the light, so I should have just carried on dry brushing to the bottom. Oh well, I've learned something today. So again, all of this is just with a single ivory black color, and all I'm doing is just changing the amount of water that I've got in my brush. And all of these effects, they come just by playing around with values. So I've got my atmosphere, I've got my my sense of depth, sense of place, and I think that's why I really enjoy working with value as a tool to create all of these things. Just some sort of boats in the distance or something like that. I think I'm going to call it a day. Let's have a look. Let's take a closer look at what we've created. There we go. So I quite like this painting. It's fairly abstract, it's atmospheric, but the main thing is that we've learned about value. So let's have a look again. So we've got our zeros, we've got our ones, we've got our twos, and we've got our threes. Zeros, 1, 2, and 3. So we've really kept a pretty limited value range, and we achieved quite a lot, I think. There is definitely a sense of atmosphere, sense of depth, and it's relatively nice to look at. Things that could have gone better, I think I should have thought through the light element at the bottom a little bit more, but that's something for next time. So thanks very much for joining, and I will see you then. Bye bye.